Hi everyone, and happy Nintendo Direct Day! Yes, it's the first Nintendo Direct presentation since the Switch actually launched. Of course, we've previously had the console Direct and Mario Kart Direct before the release date, but this is the first presentation since the console is out and in everyone's hands. It's also my first Nintendo Direct as an active channel covering Nintendo news, so this is a big one for me, and I'll be working all day making multiple videos celebrating the significance of this game, the history of Donkey Kong, my live reactions to the Direct, and then breaking it all down afterwards. Then I'll combine those into one long episode for those that prefer to listen to the full podcast in one go. Whether you want to follow along throughout the day with me or catch the full episode and future deep dives like this, all ways to follow and support the channel are at linktree/dailyswitch2. That's linktr.ee/dailyswitch2. Very glad to have you on board, and I'd love it if you'd also consider joining our free members area where you can read my blogs, interact with me, telling me what you think of the show and requesting reviews and topics, and where I'll be giving away monthly official Nintendo prizes. Again, it's free. Linktree/dailyswitch2. So, as you will know if you've watched my latest YouTube video, I'm in the middle of reviewing and covering every single launch game title. And if you are listening on Spotify, you won't have yet heard because I had to stop editing the lengthy episode to make time to cover this Direct. But I did put out what I think is a really interesting shorter video on YouTube with a deep dive into some of the statistics of the launch games, such as the average cost, download size, physical availability, etc. of all the games. And by the way, don't worry, Spotify viewers, all those stats will be added to the end of the full-length episode, which you'll be getting either later tonight or tomorrow, depending on your time zone and how long it takes my potato computer to upload with slow internet. But I mention this because of the two main criticisms of the launch lineup is that despite there being 25 games available at launch, only 3 of them are system exclusive, and only one of them is a true first-party Nintendo title, that obviously being Mario Kart World, because, say it with me, sing it from the bleachers, Welcome Tour does not count as a real game. Sorry. Donkey Kong Bananza, then, is a really important game. The second brand new, fully original, first-party Nintendo game on the system, and who better to take the reins of responsibility than Donkey Kong, Nintendo's first true mascot, who was famous even before Mario was either Super or named Mario. Many people, myself included, were desperately hoping that we'd get a new Mario platform game at launch. A 2D title would have been nice, a la Super Mario Bros. U at the launch of the Wii U, or even going back to Super Mario Bros. At the launch of the NES, or Super Mario World on the SNES. We've covered the forgotten controversies of the Super Nintendo system launch at length, but if you haven't heard it, I'd really recommend checking out that episode. It's probably my favorite that I've put together so far, not just because of nostalgia, but of how much history is truly repeating itself and how we can learn from comparing the two extremely similar launch periods that were super controversial. Super pun not intended, but it works. If you are discovering this podcast or channel brand new today because you were searching for news and opinions on the Donkey Kong Direct, welcome. Maybe go check out that episode next. On YouTube, it's the one with the Toys R Us thumbnail, and on Spotify, I think it's episode number 5. Either way, I think it can give quite a lot of context as to why this brand new Donkey Kong game is actually very important and could actually be make or break for Nintendo. But while a 2D Mario platformer would have been great at launch, we have very recently had the incredible Super Mario Wonder on Switch 1. And I think in this day and age, most people get the most excited for a 3D mascot platformer. And despite the absolutely excellent Bowser's Fury, we haven't had a true full 3D Mario platformer since Mario Odyssey, way back in the first year of the Switch. And what was that, 8 years ago? An excellent game, for sure, and one that surprisingly never received proper updates or DLC beyond that little balloon mode and the Labo VR tech demo no one played. If you did play it, let me know in the comments. I personally would love to see a proper VR headset from Nintendo, but I think that ship has probably sailed. Then again, I bought a Virtual Boy, so I'll buy anything. I think that many people assumed that because it's been so long since a real 3D Mario platformer, but Nintendo clearly was experimenting with true open world 3D for Mario with Bowser's Fury, That could only mean that a true full 3D Mario game was in the works for Nintendo Switch 2, and that may still be the case, of course. I'd wager that it probably is. Can you imagine if it had been completed and available in time for the console launch? I think many of the complaints over a lackluster launch lineup would have been quashed, and many Nintendo fans waiting to buy a system later down the line instead would have become first-day purchasers. But sadly, that wasn't the case, obviously. Here's where things become interesting, though. In the initial launch period, despite the negativity and grumbling online, much of it justified, the Switch 2 has sold over 4 million units, breaking multiple records and, on paper, proving an unqualified success. You can argue that it should have sold more units, with many long-term Nintendo fans waiting for more essential, in inverted commas, games to justify buying the system, given especially the heavy price of entry. But for now, Nintendo can be happy with the initial sales figures. Very happy. But for context, though, initial record-breaking sales figures don't really mean much in the long run. Look at the Sega Dreamcast, for example. Enormous record-breaking pre-orders and sales at launch, nothing but positive press, a very reasonable price point, a great launch lineup, a huge return to form in the eyes of the public after the missteps with the Saturn, 32X and Mega CD. But Sega couldn't keep the momentum going long-term, and despite that literal multi-record-breaking, unprecedented at the time success of the launch window, 18 months later, they'd crashed out of the console business entirely, to the astonishment of not just the rabid fans, but many industry insiders too. I remember the magazines at the time, even the multi-platform magazines, were just completely bewildered. Now, the reasons for that are complex and debatable, but it's just one of many examples from history where a console has a seemingly impressive launch sales-wise, but fails to keep the momentum going. Nintendo themselves had huge problems with software adoption on the Wii, one of their best-selling systems of all time, but the average consumer just wasn't actually buying games for the hardware, and Nintendo were in a dangerous financial position a couple of years after release, despite the console easily being the best-selling of that generation. The lack of attachment rate meant that it was unprofitable compared to the competition. Thank goodness for their handheld division, saving them not for the first time, thanks to the continued success of Pokemon. So, we have the launch of a new Nintendo console, the Switch 2, launching with a Mario Kart game as the only real system-selling exclusive. Now, sure, Mario Kart was by far the biggest selling game for the Switch 1, and it's bound to be an enormous seller this time around too. But many sales of Mario Kart go to that more casual audience that plagues the Wii, by people buying a system just to play in multiplayer at family gatherings and parties, but just stick with one or two games and not really support the growth of the system with the regular software sales that Nintendo needs. Many of their core fans are still sitting this generation out, in inverted commas, or at least for now, until there are more Nintendo first-party games that they consider essential. What would be essential? For many, a Smash Brothers title would work, but that's not coming anytime soon, is it? Where would they even go after Ultimate? Surely the definitive title. Much the same problem there was with Mario Kart World versus the pretty definitive Mario Kart Experience already out with 8 Deluxe. And in any case, Sakurai is working on Kirby's Air Riders, clearly a passion project and labor of love for him, but not the huge system seller that Nintendo needs in this early period. For others, a Metroid, F-Zero, or Star Fox would give reason to buy, but realistically, none of those are big enough franchises by themselves, despite what us rabid fans may think. And there doesn't appear to be any whiff of them appearing anyway, except, of course, for Metroid Prime 4, which will be available on Switch 1 as well. So not an obvious reason to drop $600 to get the higher resolution and a few more frames. Same problem that Sony had with getting the adoption rate for the PlayStation 5 when the majority of the early must-buy games for the PlayStation 5 were also available on the PlayStation 4. And we're all seeing how this current generation of PlayStation and Xbox is panning out. What other franchises does Nintendo have? Well, Pikmin is unlikely to get a brand new title yet, considering how recently Pikmin 4 and even 3 Deluxe and the re-releases of 1 and 2 have been on Switch 1. Of course, the big three are Pokemon, Zelda, and Mario. We know what's happening with Pokemon. It'll be great to finally play the older game with smoothing patches, but the truly new game isn't coming out for a while. I can't see a brand new Zelda title shadow dropping in the next few months either, given how much Nintendo are pushing that people re-experience Breath of the Wild, Tears of the Kingdom, Link's Awakening, and Echoes of Wisdom. And I don't think we're even likely to get the long-rumoured release of the HD remastered Wind Waker and Twilight Princess games from the Wii U coming to Switch or Switch 2. Surely Nintendo putting GameCube Wind Waker out on Switch Online means that now it's basically cancelled or indefinitely postponed, which is a shame. But so Mario it is then. A 3D Mario game in the next 3 to 6 months could really keep momentum going in a way that Nintendo desperately needs and turn around negativity and public opinion from the largest amount of their long-suffering, disgruntled, but ultimately loyal fanbase. Of course, Nintendo knows this, and if I had to bet on it, I'd say it's already long into development. Though, if history has taught us anything, it's that Mario games can take a long time to get to the required perfection for Nintendo to allow them to release. Let's not forget that the launch of the Nintendo 64 was delayed by nearly 2 years. Yes, partly due to hardware manufacturing issues, but also largely due to the extreme polishing of Mario 64 to make that delay worth the wait. It was, by the way, it's actually my second favourite game of all time, and I was there on day one. But the delayed release and the lack of significant other first-party games in the first few months of the console launch are basically the reason that Sony's PlayStation easily ran away with the win that generation. Cartridge costs, third parties, weird controllers, all the other usual complaint points would have been mitigated if the system had launched at the same time as Sony's console, with Mario 64 as day one, and then a regular stream of quality first-party titles in the launch window. Sadly, that didn't happen, and despite excellent eventual Nintendo games and even more excellent second-party games courtesy of Rare, the Nintendo 64 was a second-place system, maybe even third place in Japan, where the Saturn had an easier time of things and a longer lifespan. That slow launch window really hurt the Nintendo 64, and after 6 months of playing Mario, maybe Wave Race, and not much else, many day one adapters of the console started to look elsewhere. That could very easily happen to Nintendo now with the Switch 2. They need a Mario platformer, other major titles like a Zelda, mainline Pokemon, preferably a Smash Brothers, and then sprinkled between their smaller but still prestige franchise titles like Metroid, Pikmin, Star Fox, F-Zero, Chibi Robo, I don't know. And Animal Crossing would be great as well, but unless we have another pandemic requiring a worldwide lockdown, God forbid, Nintendo sadly won't recreate the lightning in a bottle success of New Horizons. That was clearly just a once-in-a-lifetime wave that Nintendo were lucky enough to ride through circumstances. And the Switch one had the major advantage of being able to steadily re-release the best games from the Wii U, because almost nobody bought them first time round. Muggins here did, but the Switch one's early library, therefore, was artificially inflated with quality first-party titles. They can't rest on their laurels if they want to match that success and sales attachment rate with the Switch 2. So, with no 3D Mario game announced, there is a huge hole in the required launch window. But here comes a new challenger. Had we all forgotten about Donkey Kong? Nintendo's first big success. Miyamoto's original creation. Before Mario, before Zelda, before Pikmin, he had Donkey Kong, and it was glorious. There have been times in the past when Donkey Kong was a true system seller. The original Famicom, Nintendo's first proper serious attempt at a games console hardware and what would obviously eventually be rebranded as the NES in the West, was originally designed specifically with the goal of being able to sell to the consumer on the promise of playing an accurate home version of Donkey Kong. When Nintendo's 16-bit console, the Super Nintendo, was flagging in the West and being outsold 3 years in a row by the Sega Genesis or Mega Drive, Was it a Mario or Zelda game that turned around the fortunes and eventually won the console wars sales-wise? No. It was Donkey Kong Country. Again, thank you, Rare. I struggle to think of other examples where DK was a true system seller and can think of many lesser entries, but I do have very fond memories of the launch of the Super Game Boy, where Donkey Kong 94 was the killer app launch game being used to demonstrate that system. And for my money, that's perhaps the finest 2D Mario game ever made. Fight me, bro. And it doesn't even have Mario in the title. In recent years, however, Donkey Kong has somewhat stagnated. Sure, Donkey Kong Tropical Freeze, to those in the know, is one of the absolute greatest 2D platform games of all time, but it and its still good but inferior and looking a little long in the tooth predecessor didn't exactly set sales figures ablaze when they were re-released on the Switch One. I would argue because of the extremely cynical overpricing, especially with Donkey Kong Returns. But now, here we are. Donkey Kong Bananza, not Bonanza, but Bananza. You see, it's a pun because Donkey Kong likes bananas. Oh, how we laughed. But this is no laughing matter. It's the first true 3D Donkey Kong platform game since the Nintendo 64, and this time, no expansion pack is required. When we don't have a 3D Mario game, can 3D Donkey Kong step in and fill Jumpman's shoes? I would argue quite possibly. The trailers and gameplay footage look very intriguing so far to me. Excellent character animation, just like in Mario Kart World, but this time with more opportunities to actually show it off because it's a platform game with cinematics. And really interesting looking digging mechanic. Is this Banjo-Kazooie X Minecraft? It remains to be seen. Anytime Nintendo takes such a risk and tries something new, I'm both excited and a little frightened. In the launch period of a system, we need a consistent, steady flow of safe, guaranteed crowd pleasers. Will Donkey Kong Bananza be the first true system-exclusive game from Nintendo that convinces more long-term fans to buy into the new console's ecosystem? I don't know. I hope so, and I think that by the end of today, we'll have a lot clearer idea of whether this game is likely to crown Nintendo as the king of the jungle. Strap in, folks. Let's enjoy the Direct. Good luck, everyone, and be sure to subscribe and stick with me all day to hear my full reactions and coverage throughout the event. You can find all the links to follow and support the show, plus that free members area where I do official Nintendo merch giveaways at linktree/dailyswitch2, linktr.ee/dailyswitch2. I hope to see you there, and I look forward to hearing everyone's reactions after the Direct. Thanks, everyone.